The Dark Scrolls. The darkness that settled over Malacca was not born only of the hour, but of something deeper. A hush so complete it pressed against the skin, muffling every sound save the uneven rasp of the Sultan's breath. It was said the palace had always carried the scent of sandalwood and iron, but in those days a new smell lingered, metallic and sour, clinging to the tapestries and the lacquered screens, as though it too were waiting for the inevitable unraveling of all things. Sultan Mahmud Shah had not always been a fearful man. In his youth he had been known for his bright intelligence, the quiet command in his voice, the way his eyes seemed to read the hearts of those who came before him. But now, anyone who looked into those same eyes saw a flicker of something wounded and unmoored, a mind slipping on the polished floor of its own obsessions. It began on a night of wind and omens. The sky cracked with lightning, bright enough to carve silhouettes of the city's rooftops against the rain-streaked dark. The Sultan lay awake in his chamber, unable to close his eyes, listening to the scuttling sounds behind the carved wooden walls. The noise was small, the sort any other man might have ignored, a creature searching for warmth, or a stray draft rattling the screens. But to Mahmud Shah it was the sound of conspiracy. Each skittering footfall became proof of betrayal, breathing against the back of his neck. When at last he slept, it was not into rest, but into a vision so vivid that he woke with his heart battering his ribs. He dreamed he stood alone in the throne room. The columns rose around him like the trunks of a petrified forest. There, on the empty dais where he had ruled for decades, a shape crouched. Its fur was black as midnight oil, its tail twitching over the edge of the step. When he took a step forward, the creature turned to look at him. Its eyes glowed, two polished coins of molten gold. He tried to speak, but no words came, only a hollow rasp. In the dream he understood. This was no ordinary beast. It was the herald of treachery, the embodiment of every unspoken threat. He awoke with the word traitor echoing in his mind, so loud it seemed to scrape at his bones. From that dawn forward, his life divided into before and after. He began by confiding in his vizier, a thin man with a neat beard who had served him since boyhood. The vizier listened with careful attention as the Sultan described the dream and the certainty that the black cats of Malacca were more than mere animals, that they were the carriers of a curse laid upon the throne. "My lord," the vizier said carefully, choosing each word as if it might explode in his hand, "it is only a dream. Black cats are common in the city. They have always been." But Mahmud Shah shook his head. "You do not understand. They are watching. They know every disloyal whisper before I hear it myself." His voice cracked, and in that fracture was a terror so absolute that the vizier's composure slipped. That same evening, the Sultan summoned the heralds. Their horns blared from every quarter of the city, summoning merchants, fishermen, holy men, and beggars alike to the square. Lanterns swung on tall poles, throwing the gathered faces into relief, anxious, bewildered, already sensing that something irreversible was about to unfold. When the Sultan emerged, clad in a robe the color of old bruises, the hush deepened. He did not climb the dais. He stood among them, his expression gaunt and hollow. "People of Malacca," he said, his voice steady but drained of warmth, "know that I have seen what you cannot. I have beheld the form of our undoing. The black cats among us are not innocent creatures. They are the spies of betrayal, the shadows that slip through our doors to whisper sedition. From this night forward, none shall be permitted to harbor them. They are to be hunted, seized, and destroyed." A ripple passed through the crowd. Somewhere near the edge, a woman let out a strangled sob. The Sultan's gaze flicked to her, and she fell silent at once, covering her mouth as if to hold the sound inside. "I will have no mercy," he continued. "Those who defy this decree shall share the fate of the creatures they protect." When the lanterns were doused and the crowd dispersed, the city lay in a hush so brittle it seemed any sound would shatter it. That night the first patrols began. Soldiers moved through the alleys with torches that guttered in the wind, calling out to drive the cats from their hiding places. The animals scattered, sleek shadows darting through doorways and over walls. Some found refuge in rafters or storage cellars. Others were cornered in courtyards and carried away, their yowls curdling the air. Inside their homes, families clutched one another, listening to the pitiful chorus of cries as the soldiers passed. Children asked why the Sultan hated the cats. No parent dared to answer. In the palace, Mahmud Shah did not sleep. He sat by the windowsill, hands clasped tight in his lap, watching the lights moving through the streets. Each time he heard a cat's voice raised in terror, he closed his eyes and breathed easier, telling himself the threat was being purged, piece by piece. But the dreams did not leave him. On the third night after the edict, he dreamed he was again in the throne room. This time the black cat sat on the step below the dais. Its eyes were embers in a face of ink. When it opened its mouth, words poured out in a voice like rusted hinges. "You can destroy the body, but the shadow will remain." He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. At dawn, the captain of the guard came to report. More than 30 cats had been caught. Most had been drowned in the river, as the Sultan had commanded, though some had been slain by blades when they refused to die quickly. But even as he delivered the account, the captain's eyes darted to the Sultan's face, searching for any glimmer of reason. He found none. "Take their bodies," the Sultan said, quietly. "Hang them on the city gates." "My lord." "Hang them," Mahmud Shah repeated, his tone flat. By sunset, every gate of Malacca bore the proof of the Sultan's decree. The bodies of black cats dangled from ropes, their fur sodden from rain, their mouths frozen in soundless cries. Some said the sight turned their stomachs. Others crossed themselves and hurried past, refusing to look up. A few could not look away, drawn by some terrible fascination to the rows of little corpses, the way they swayed in the salt-laden wind as if still alive. And in the palace, Mahmud Shah began to pace. He prowled the corridors at night, candle in hand, examining every alcove and archway. Servants learned to keep to their chambers, for to be caught in the Sultan's path was to be subjected to his questions. Endless, urgent, whispered through cracked lips. "Have you seen it? The one with the golden eyes?" When they answered no, he stared at them a moment longer than he should have, as though measuring the weight of their denial, then turned away to resume his search. The fear spread like a sickness. Soon it was not only the black cats that were hunted, but those who had once been seen feeding them. Neighbors whispered names to the guards, some out of loyalty, some out of desperation to deflect suspicion. Before long, the prisons began to fill with men and women who had done nothing more than scatter scraps of fish in a doorway or leave a dish of milk in an alley. And yet, each night, Mahmud Shah dreamed the same dream: the cat, the throne room, the molten eyes, the voice that told him, no matter how many he killed, no matter how many he punished, the shadow remained. He began to wonder if the darkness was not outside him at all, but inside, spreading through the chambers of his heart like ink spilled into water. In the city, the people stopped speaking aloud. They moved in small, silent groups, avoiding any glance that might be mistaken for defiance. Even the traders who came by sea began to give Malacca a wide berth, whispering of the cursed ruler who had turned against his own shadows. But Mahmud Shah did not see the fear he created. He saw only the promise of deliverance, so close he could almost touch it. And still, somewhere beyond his reach, a single pair of eyes watched him. The weeks that followed were swallowed by a darkness so profound it became a presence in every household. No longer did the city sing with the chatter of merchants or the chiming laughter of children in the courtyards. Malacca had fallen under a hush, broken only by the rasp of soldiers' boots on cobblestone and the soft thump of bodies struck down when fear and suspicion turned neighbor against neighbor. Some nights, when the wind came in cold from the sea, the smell of decay drifted across the rooftops. Mothers pressed damp cloths to the mouths of their children, telling them it was only the fish markets rotting in the heat. But everyone knew the truth. The corpses of the cats still hung at the gates, some already stiff and shrunken to half their size, their fur clinging to their bones like burnt paper. Sultan Mahmud Shah had forbidden their removal. To him they were proof, living testimony, that he would not tolerate betrayal in any form. He believed that in displaying them, he could remind the people that shadows could not hide from his gaze. Yet, even as he passed each gate, stopping to inspect the bodies, a hollow certainty gnawed at him. The true shadow had not been destroyed. The palace guards learned to keep their faces blank when he returned from these inspections. He would stand for hours by the largest gate, staring up at the bodies that spun slowly in the breeze. Sometimes he spoke to them in low, confiding tones, as if they might answer his questions when no living creature would. One night, as he lingered there long past midnight, he heard it, a sound so soft it might have been imagined, a purr so resonant it seemed to vibrate in his chest. He spun, torch raised high, searching the shadows pooled beyond the archway. The flame guttered in a sudden gust, throwing a shiver of light across the road, and there, just for an instant, he saw them. Two golden eyes, bright as coins, fixed on him with a knowing, patient amusement. He took a step forward, his mouth dry. The eyes did not blink, but when he thrust the torch higher, the darkness swallowed them whole. He heard no retreating pause, no whisper of movement, only the thud of his own heart against his ribs. He returned to the palace in a fever. For days afterward he refused all counsel, barricading himself in his chambers. Servants left food at the threshold. Sometimes, in the small hours, they heard him muttering prayers that bled into curses. Other times they heard sobbing so raw it made them weep in sympathy, though none dared to say aloud for whom they wept, the Sultan or the city he was dragging into ruin. But no matter how he tried, he could not shake the certainty that he had looked into the eyes of the last cat, the creature that haunted his dreams and would not die. At dawn on the 7th day of his isolation, he emerged. His hair was unbound, streaked with gray, and his eyes had sunk into bruised hollows. He summoned the captain of the guard and spoke in a voice that scraped the air like a rusted blade. "We have not finished," he said. "They are still here. You will search every house, every cellar, every shrine. No hiding place will protect them." "My lord," the captain whispered, choosing his words with deadly care, "we have searched every quarter. We have killed them all." "All?" The Sultan leaned closer until the captain could see the faint tremor in his lips. "Then why do I see it? Why do I hear it in my dreams?" The captain did not answer. There was no answer that would save him. Mahmud Shah drew back, pressing the heels of his hands to his eyes. "It is the people, their whole," he whispered. "They are sheltering it. There is a conspiracy, some unholy pact." He turned away, voice rising. "We will find the last one, even if it means burning every house to the ground." By the following sundown, a new proclamation was nailed to every gate and bazaar post. Any citizen suspected of harboring a black cat or of aiding its survival would be executed alongside their family. The effect was instantaneous. Panic roared through the city like wildfire. Neighbors turned on one another, denouncing old friends to the guards in a frenzy of terror. Some families fled into the jungle, hoping to outrun the Sultan's madness. But most simply locked their doors and prayed that the darkness would pass over them, as if it were a plague blown in from the sea. Yet even this cruelty brought the Sultan no relief. Each night he lay in his vast bed, wrapped in layers of embroidered silk, feeling the gaze of something just beyond the reach of the candlelight. He began to see the eyes in waking visions, hovering in doorways, gleaming in the corners of tapestries. He had mirrors removed from every chamber. He could no longer bear to see his own reflection, for sometimes in the glass, another shape crouched beside him, black and sleek and eternal. The court began to crumble. His advisers, long cowed by his rage, started to vanish, some fleeing by boat under cover of darkness, others disappearing into the dungeons when the Sultan became convinced they too were in league with the cat. The vizier, who had once dared to counsel caution, was dragged from his bed at dawn. He was accused of sorcery, of calling the creature to Malacca with incantations. No trial was held. His body was displayed beside the western gate, a warning to any who might doubt the Sultan's visions. Still, Mahmud Shah was not satisfied. He began to dream that the black cat walked the corridors of the palace, its tail raised like a banner, pausing before each door to mark it with a flick of its claws. In these dreams, wherever the cat passed, walls split open to reveal writhing shadows. From within, countless golden eyes stared out, unblinking. He would wake screaming. His attendants learned to wait in the antechamber until his cries subsided. When they finally dared to enter, they often found him crouched in the corner, clutching his knees, rocking back and forth as he whispered broken phrases. One dawn, he gathered the captains of the guard and declared that the palace itself was tainted. He commanded them to search every chamber. The soldiers obeyed, though each step was weighted by dread. They turned over chests and broke open hidden compartments. They peered beneath tapestries and into the dark spaces between the walls. They found nothing. But as they emerged one by one to report their failure, the Sultan watched them with eyes that seemed not to see them at all. When the last captain knelt before him, swearing that the palace was clean, Mahmud Shah's expression cracked into a rictus of despair. "You do not understand," he whispered. "It is not a creature of flesh. It is a spirit. It knows my thoughts. It breathes in my dreams." A long silence fell. Somewhere far beyond the palace walls, the call to prayer rose, carried on the wind. But inside the court, no one moved. No one dared to speak. At length the Sultan turned away, and in that turning something broke in him. He walked slowly to the dais where his throne waited, its inlaid gold dulled by dust and neglect. For the first time in weeks, he sank onto its cushions, his hands limp on the carved arms. The soldiers began to retreat, but he lifted a hand, stopping them. His voice, when it came, was softer than they had ever heard it, thin and wondering as if he spoke to a ghost. "Tell me," he murmured to the darkness gathering in the corners, "what do you want of me?" There was no answer, and yet just before the torches guttered, plunging the hall into gloom, some swore they saw movement by the steps of the throne, a shape no bigger than a child's shadow, so black it swallowed the light, and in its darkness the faint gleam of two golden eyes, watching without pity or haste. That night the Sultan did not sleep at all. He walked the length of the palace, the soles of his slippers whispering against the tiles. Sometimes he paused to listen at doorways. Sometimes he whispered the name no one else dared to speak aloud. When dawn came, he was standing in the open courtyard, rain trickling over his face. He looked up at the storm-laden sky as if it might offer absolution, but the clouds only glared down in silence. In the city below, a woman opened her shutters to empty a basin of rainwater. She looked up by chance, her heart jolting to see the Sultan alone in the courtyard, robes soaked through, hair plastered to his temples. And there, at his feet, sat a black cat, its eyes gleaming bright as the storm's heart. At first, the woman in the window thought her eyes deceived her. She blinked rain from her lashes, pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a cry, but when she dared to look again, the sight remained unchanged. The Sultan stood unmoving in the courtyard, his arms hanging limp at his sides, and before him crouched the black cat. The rain did not touch its fur. It was as dry as a shadow cast across water, its tail curled neatly around its paws. Though the distance between them was only the width of a man's stride, Mahmud Shah looked as though he beheld a chasm too vast to cross. They remained that way for what seemed an hour, the sky groaning overhead, the gutters spilling torrents across the tiles. Then, as though compelled by some force beyond will, the Sultan dropped to his knees. He bowed his head so low his wet hair trailed the stones. From her window the woman saw him lift his hands and stretch them toward the creature. She could not hear his voice over the rain, but she knew in her marrow he was pleading. The cat did not move. When at last Mahmud Shah rose, something in him had withered. His shoulders sagged, and his gaze no longer searched the corners for hidden enemies. He walked slowly back through the archway, his wet slippers leaving a wavering trail that the rain quickly washed away. That was the day the last of the councillors fled. Some escaped on fishing skiffs under moonless skies. Others bribed the guards to look away as they slipped into the jungle. A few remained, too terrified to run, waiting for the end to claim them as it claimed everything else. For the Sultan, time began to lose its shape. He drifted through the halls in a waking fever. Sometimes he believed he was still dreaming, that the palace was a mirage conjured by the cat to torment him. He no longer ordered patrols. No new proclamations were nailed to the gates. He had ceased to believe any human hand could end what had begun. In the city, the fear became a kind of numbness. People went about their days in a hush so complete it felt like life beneath a burial shroud. Children were kept indoors. Doors were barred at sunset. Those who still dared to glance toward the palace saw the windows dark, the courtyards empty. But at night, rumors flickered like lightning over the rooftops. A fisherman claimed to have seen the Sultan wandering the battlements, speaking to the cat as though it were an old confidant. A laundress swore she glimpsed a trail of black paw prints on the marble stairs, prints that never faded, no matter how many times they were scrubbed away. And always the eyes returned. They glowed from the shadows behind the tapestries. They burned in the mirrors that had not yet been shattered. They hovered in the spaces between candle flames. No matter where the Sultan turned, he found them waiting, patient and unblinking. At last he ceased resisting. There was no ceremony to his surrender. One evening, as the rain began to fall yet again, he took a single lamp and carried it into the throne room. He walked past the dais where he had once sat in judgment over thousands, past the columns carved with verses no one living could still recite, all the way to the far wall, where a screen of polished ebony hid the private chapel of his ancestors. He pushed aside the screen and stepped into the darkness. In that hush he spoke to the cat, not as a ruler, but as a man who had nothing left to offer but the scraps of his sanity. His words were slow and deliberate, as if he feared any haste might break the fragile accord between them. "I see you," he whispered. "I have always seen you. You are what remains when all else falls away." The darkness seemed to thicken around him, as though the night itself had leaned close to listen. "I have tried to be rid of you," he went on, his voice breaking. "I have killed your kin. I have destroyed all who would shelter you. Yet here you remain." For a moment no sound rose but the drip of water from his hair onto the stone floor. "What are you?" A breath of wind stirred the lamp flame. In its flicker he saw them, two perfect circles of molten gold. No longer fearful, he stepped closer, feeling the cold of the stones seep into his bare feet. "Will you not answer me?" The silence was deeper than any he had ever known. Then the cat blinked. Once. Slowly. He understood at last that there was no answer to be given, because the question itself was meaningless. The cat was not a creature to be reasoned with or defeated. It was the shape of his own wrought, the proof that the darkness he had hunted beyond the gates had always lived inside him. The lamp guttered low. In its last flare, he saw the cat lift its head as though in acknowledgement, and then the flame died. The Sultan did not return to his bedchamber. At dawn, when the bravest of his servants crept through the throne room, they found him slumped against the wall, his robes pooled around him like a broken banner. His eyes were open, fixed on something only he could see. In the days that followed, the Portuguese came. Their ships, so long held at bay by the power of Malacca, anchored at the mouth of the river. Soldiers in foreign armor poured into the city, finding no resistance. The gates stood open, their hooks still bearing the mummified remains of Black Cassus, swinging slowly in the salt wind. When they entered the palace, they found a ruin. Tapestry shredded by claws no hand had woven. Mirrors cracked in starbursts of darkness, a hush so profound it pressed against the lungs. In the great hall they discovered the Sultan's body. Though he had died sitting upright, his face was contorted, as though he had glimpsed something in his final moment that no words could describe. They buried him in the courtyard. As they lowered his body into the earth, a storm broke across the sky, rattling the walls and tearing tiles from the roof. Some said it was only the monsoon come early. Others believed it was the cat, claiming what had always belonged to it. In the years that followed, the city changed hands many times. New rulers rose and fell. The gates were rebuilt, the old banners torn down. But no one dared to remove the last of the hooks. They said the eyes still watched, that if you passed the palace at midnight, you might see a sleek black shape perched atop the battlements, tail curling lazily as it surveyed the kingdom that had crumbled beneath its gaze. And sometimes, only sometimes, someone would hear a low purr vibrating through the stones, a sound not of any living beast, but of something older, patient and unending. People learned not to linger there after dark. Even now the story persists. Mothers whisper it to children who stray too far at night, warning them that shadows can remember when all else is forgotten. Sailors passing the strait avert their eyes from the ruins, unwilling to test whether the tale is true. Because in Malacca there are some who swear with the certainty of those who have seen what others will not, that when the last embers die and the night settles absolute and unforgiving, a pair of golden eyes burn through the dark, watching, remembering, waiting. They say that on any night, amid the ashes of Malacca, a pair of blazing golden eyes still stare straight into the soul of anyone who dares to betray. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.